Condemn the station tonight, Mayor Vale said. By sunrise, it belongs to the county. Grant Holloway stood before the council, one hand on a leather ledger, atlas pressed against his boot. Then read this first. Vale glanced down. A notebook won't change code. Grant opened to a page. No, but your mother's name might. The room went silent. Vale's face changed before anyone understood why. For 30 days, he had tried to take the abandoned station from a broke veteran. Now one forgotten entry could stop everything and expose what the town had buried. But this began with $20. At 42, Grant Holloway owned a faded pickup, a steel toolbox missing 3 sockets, 2 clean shirts, and a 7-year-old German Shepherd named Atlas. The truck had been his bedroom since March, though Grant called it temporary. By late May 2026, he had $260 folded behind his driver's license. Atlas watched him count it from the passenger seat, ears forward, as if money were another sound Grant might misread. Hawthorne Falls, Ohio was not where Grant had planned to stop. A worn alternator belt decided that. He stayed because Evelyn Ross, who ran the diner near the courthouse, needed her back steps rebuilt. Then the feed store needed roof work. Evelyn paid in cash, kept his coffee warm, and never used the careful voice people chose after learning he was a veteran. One Thursday morning, Grant noticed a county auction notice taped inside her window. The final listing was Hawthorne Junction Station, a 2-story brick depot, 3 platforms, an old freight room, and nearly 8 acres. Passenger service had ended in 2004. Opening bid $10. Unpaid assessments $200. Evelyn followed his eyes. Don't, she said. That station has been empty 22 years. Grant read the listing again. Platform 3. The words pulled loose a memory. 12 years earlier, he and Eli Carter had stopped beside the station while hauling equipment to a training site. Their truck overheated, and they sat on Platform 3 with paper cups of coffee. Eli talked about opening a workshop after service, a place where veterans could learn carpentry or electrical work. A person doesn't need saving forever, Eli had said. Sometimes he needs one place long enough to stand up straight. Eli died in a training accident before their final deployment ended. Grant attended the memorial and let the workshop idea become one more thing nobody knew how to ask him about. Atlas rested his chin on Grant's boot. Grant folded the notice. What time? He asked. The auction room smelled of floor polish and rain carried in on shoes. 26 people sat in folding chairs. Atlas waited beneath the courthouse steps because the clerk would not allow dogs inside. Mayor Richard Vale sat near the front in a pale summer suit. The station came last. The auctioneer asked for $10. Nobody moved. Someone near the wall laughed once. Grant raised his hand. 10. Vale looked back, then lifted one finger. 15. Grant felt the bills in his pocket gain weight. 20. The room went still. Vale studied him, then lowered his hand. The auctioneer sold Hawthorne Junction Station to Grant Holloway for $20, plus $200 in assessments. Grant signed 4 times. Outside, he had $40 left, a stamped deed packet, and the first thing he had owned in years that could not fit inside his truck. Atlas stood at once. We bought a train station, Grant said. The dog looked toward the old clock tower above the trees. Vale came through the courthouse doors behind them. Mr. Holloway. Grant turned. Vale noticed the faded unit patch inside his jacket. You served? Yes, sir. Then you should know when a position can't be held. Grant let the words settle. I know the difference between impossible and neglected. Vale's mouth tightened. That building will cost more than you have. Most things do. Grant walked 6 blocks with Atlas beside him. The station stood behind a chain-link fence, red brick dulled by years, upper windows dark, platform signs faded almost white. Grant stopped at the gate. For 1 second, he felt foolish enough to laugh and tired enough not to. Atlas slipped his nose through the fence, breathed in, then turned toward Platform 3. He did not pull. He simply waited. Grant touched the deed packet inside his jacket. All right, he said. Let's see what we bought. Grant returned an hour later with a borrowed bolt cutter, 2 bottles of water, contractor bags, and a flashlight Evelyn said had 1 good battery and 1 stubborn one. The chain at the gate gave after the second squeeze. Atlas stepped through first, nose low, tail level. Grant followed and closed the gate behind them with a loop of wire. The station looked larger from inside the fence. Red brick walls ran along 3 platforms. Weeds had grown through the concrete, but the platform edges remained straight. Grant walked the perimeter before touching the front door. He checked the foundation, studied the roofline, and marked the places where slate tiles were missing. One gutter sagged near the freight room. The main walls had held. Could be worse, he said. Atlas glanced back as if that depended on the standard. The front door was oak beneath gray paint. Its lock had rusted solid, but one hinge had already pulled loose. Grant removed the hinge pins instead of forcing the frame. It took 20 minutes. When the door leaned inward, trapped air came out carrying dust, dry wood, old paper, and something faintly metallic. Grant waited until his eyes adjusted. The waiting room stretched beneath dark beams. 2 rows of benches remained bolted to the floor. A brass grill covered the ticket window. Above it, an octagonal clock had stopped at 3:17. On the far wall, a sign reading Plaf 3 hung crooked but intact. Atlas moved room to room while Grant tested the floor with a screwdriver handle. He marked soft areas with orange tape. He found no standing water and no shift in the main staircase. The building had been ignored, not defeated. The difference loosened something in his chest. By late afternoon, Grant had cleared a rectangle near the front windows. Beneath the dirt lay black and white hexagonal tiles. He swept until a full pattern appeared, then stood with both hands on the broom. The place had been waiting under its own dust. He knew the feeling. The bell over the door gave a weak ring. Atlas turned but did not bark. Evelyn entered carrying a canvas bag and a folded tarp. "I brought food before you started pretending you didn't need any." She set down sandwiches, coffee, work gloves, and an old first aid kit. Grant looked at the supplies. "I can pay you after my next job. Return the tarp clean." She crossed to the boarded lunch counter and rested her fingers on the wood. "My mother brought me here for pie. Nora Bell ran this counter. Quiet woman, remembered everybody's coffee." Grant heard a small change in her voice. "What happened to her?" "She stayed after the train stopped. Then one year she didn't." Evelyn took her hand away. Before leaving, she told him the diner opened at 6, and coffee would be waiting whether he had money or not. Grant thanked her once. A second thank you would have sounded like apology. At dusk, he spread the tarp on the clean tile and used his jacket as a pillow. Atlas lay facing the door. The station made small noises as it cooled. Timber settling, metal ticking, wind moving through a cracked transom. Grant named each sound until none felt like a warning. Near midnight, Atlas rose and disappeared into the corridor leading to Platform 3. Grant heard claws stop against wood, then one slow scrape. He took the flashlight and followed. Atlas stood beside a wide pine plank near the platform door. He scratched once, sat down and looked at Grant. Grant knelt and pressed each end. The board moved. Its nail heads were newer than the surrounding floor. He put on Evelyn's gloves, checked the boards around it, and worked a pry bar under the edge. The plank lifted with a dry sigh. Below it was darkness. Grant struck the flashlight against his palm. The beam dropped into the narrow space beneath the floor and caught on something at the back. Not glass, not water, a dull green corner of metal. Atlas lowered his head toward the opening. Grant did not reach in yet. "Tomorrow," he said, though neither of them believed him. Grant waited until first light before reaching into the opening. He called it caution, though part of him wanted the station to keep its secret a little longer. Morning came warm through the broken transom. Atlas lay beside the loose plank, watching Grant put on gloves and test the floor around it. The crawl space was barely 2 feet deep, framed by brick and old joists. Grant lowered the flashlight, stretched flat on the tile, and reached toward the dull green corner. His fingers closed around a leather handle. The object moved an inch and stopped. "Heavy," he said. Atlas came closer. Grant worked it sideways, careful not to scrape the joists, then pulled until a canvas-covered trunk cleared the opening. It was the size of a footlocker, reinforced with brass corners darkened almost black. Someone had wrapped the lock in waxed cloth before hiding it. Grant sat back on his heels. He had found forgotten tools and photographs in old buildings, but nothing placed with this much care. Atlas sniffed the lid, then sat. Grant removed the rusted hasp one screw at a time. When the trunk opened, cedar, paper, and metal rose from it. Inside lay 2 glass jars wrapped in dish towels, photographs tied with blue ribbon, railroad keys, a folded deed, a leather ledger, and 1 envelope placed on top. Across it, in firm handwriting, were the words, "For the person who opens this place again." Grant carried everything to the cleaned bench beneath the ticket clock. The deed named Nora Bell as owner of Hawthorne Junction Station. Purchase price, $500. Date, September 18, 2004. Grant checked his county papers beside it. The county had sold him the property, but Nora's deed raised questions he could not answer. He opened the ledger. The first page held one sentence: names of people who needed one night, one meal, one call, or one fair chance. The entries began in 1984. Each line listed a name, an age, where the person came from, what Nora offered, and where that person went next. Daniel Price, 31, discharged mechanic, missed bus, meal and room, Toledo repair shop. Walter Dean, 23, recently separated from service, breakfast and electrical apprenticeship, Erie County. Page after page, the handwriting stayed steady. Some received bus fare, some received clean clothes, a job lead, or permission to sleep upstairs without explaining themselves. Besides several names Nora had written returned later to help. The final entry was dated June 2012. Total Hun 86. Grant rested one hand on the cover. Atlas placed a paw against his boot, not asking for attention, only making contact. Grant opened the envelope. Nora wrote that exhausted people often sounded careless when they were ashamed, and hungry people sometimes seemed ungrateful because fear had used up their manners. She had learned not to ask for a life story before serving food. Respect first, she wrote. Questions later. A person should not have to perform their pain to earn a chair. After the railroad left, she bought the station and kept one room, one telephone, and the lunch counter open. The trains were gone, but stranded people still arrived by highway, hospital discharge, factory closure, and bad luck. The silver coins were meant to repair the station if someone willing to continue the work ever found them. Grant stopped reading. His throat tightened, too close to hope. He looked across the waiting room at the benches and the crooked sign to Platform 3. Eli's words returned. One place long enough to stand up straight. Grant had believed he bought shelter. Nora's letter suggested he had bought an obligation. The bell over the front door gave a weak ring. Evelyn stepped inside, carrying coffee. She saw the open trunk, the deed, and the ledger. Her face lost its usual quickness. "You found Nora," she said. Grant looked down at the names. "I think she found us." Evelyn did not touch the ledger at first. She stood beside the bench, studying Nora Bell's handwriting, as though it might recognize her. Grant turned the book toward her. "You said she remembered everyone's coffee." Evelyn nodded. She remembered more than that. She sat and began reading. Atlas settled near her shoes. Halfway through the book, her fingers stopped. Thomas Ross, 26, factory closure. No fare home, meal 2 nights upstairs. Maintenance interview at Lakeview Hotel. Hired, returned 6 months later with new work boots for the shelf. Evelyn read the line twice. "Thomas never told us who helped him," she said. "He came home one Sunday wearing a hotel uniform and carrying groceries for my mother. Said somebody at the station gave him a number to call." Her voice stayed level, but the page tightened in her hand. "We thought he got lucky." Grant looked at Nora's writing. Maybe he did. Evelyn shook her head. Luck is when a bus arrives early. This was a person deciding he still mattered. She read Nora's letter in silence, then folded it along the old creases. "There's someone you need to meet, Margaret Whitaker, Nora's niece. Last relative I know of." Grant glanced at the county deed packet. Could she challenge the sale? She could ask enough questions to freeze everything. Evelyn wrote an address on a diner receipt. "Go before the county hears about the trunk. People deserve the truth before paperwork reshapes it." A vehicle crossed the cracked lot. Atlas rose, ears forward. A county SUV stopped near the entrance. Mayor Richard Vail stepped out with a man carrying a clipboard and hard hat. Vail entered without knocking. His eyes moved from the swept tile to the open trunk, then paused on the ledger. Evelyn closed the book. "Mr. Holloway," said, "This is Dennis Cole, County Building Inspector." Cole gave Grant a tired nod. Vail handed Grant a white envelope. Inside was a notice of unsafe occupancy and a 30-day compliance order. The list named roof leaks, outdated wiring, inactive water service, a damaged rear stair, missing emergency lighting, and an unverified section of flooring near the freight room. Failure to correct the hazards could close the station and begin county recovery proceedings. Grant read every line. Some items were fair. Others came from reports nearly 15 years old. "You inspected all of this today?" he asked. Cole shifted the clipboard. "Not yet. This notice comes from the existing file. I'm scheduled for a full walkthrough next week." Vale spoke before he could continue. Sign the property back to the county, and we'll waive the administrative costs. Atlas moved beside Grant. His shoulder touched Grant's knee, light and steady. Grant folded the notice once. If the building is unsafe, I'll make it safe. With $40, Vale asked. With an honest list, a repair plan, and whatever I can earn. Vale looked toward the trunk. Old buildings make people sentimental. Sentiment does not satisfy code. Neither does pressure, Grant said. Cole looked at him then, not as a fool, but as a man who had heard the difference. Vale's jaw tightened. 30 days, he walked out. Cole remained long enough to hand Grant his card. Call before you cover anything. I need to see the framing. Then he followed. The SUV left dust hanging over the lot. Evelyn reopened the ledger. Now you know why you need Margaret. Grant looked at the notice, then at Nora's letter. He had bought a roof because he needed shelter. Now the roof had a history. The history had an heir, and the county had given him 30 days to prove none of it should disappear. Atlas returned to the loose plank and lay beside it. Grant picked up the receipt with Margaret's address. We go today, he said. Margaret Whitaker's house stood at the end of Linden Avenue behind 2 maple trees, and a porch painted the blue-gray common to old Midwestern homes. Grant parked along the curb and left the windows cracked for Atlas. The dog watched him cross the yard but did not complain. Grant carried copies of Nora's deed and letter inside a plain folder. Margaret opened the door before he knocked twice. She was 74, silver-haired, straight-backed, and dressed as though she had expected a difficult conversation and intended to meet it properly. You're the man who bought the station, she said. Yes, Mom, for $20, plus assessments. That does not improve the story. Grant almost smiled. Margaret let him in. Her living room held framed family photographs, polished furniture, and a clock loud enough to divide the silence into equal parts. Grant placed Nora's photograph on the coffee table, then the deed and letter. Margaret picked up the photograph first. Nora stood behind the station counter in a white apron, one hand resting beside a coffee urn. She hated having her picture taken, Margaret said. She said photographs made people behave like strangers to themselves. She put on her reading glasses and opened the letter. Grant looked toward the window while she read. Margaret stopped once, removed her glasses, then began again from the top. When she finished, she rested the pages on her knee. My mother called her stubborn, she said. The family called her lonely. We thought she stayed at that station because she had nowhere else to be. She had 186 reasons, Grant said. Margaret looked at him. Why did you bring this to me? The deed is in her name. The county sold me what it believed it owned. You may have a claim. And you are telling me that before consulting a lawyer, it belongs to your family's history before it belongs to my plans. Margaret studied him long enough to make the ticking clock feel louder. Where are you living? At the station. Before that, my truck. Her eyes moved to the faded cuff of his work shirt, then back to his face. She did not soften her voice. Grant appreciated that. What do you plan to do with the place? First, make it safe. After that, I don't know yet. I'm beginning to understand. Margaret rose, crossed to a writing desk, and took out a sheet of stationery. She wrote slowly, asking Grant to spell his full name and the property description. When she finished, she read the statement aloud. She relinquished any inheritance interest in Hawthorne Junction Station and transferred any surviving family claim to Grant Holloway, subject to lawful recording. This needs a notary, she said. There's one at the bank. Grant did not reach for the paper. You should think about it. I have spent 50 years misunderstanding that woman. I do not need another afternoon to decide whether to interfere with the first person who listened to her. At the bank, Margaret signed before a notary and pressed the stamped document into Grant's hand. Do not turn her work into a monument, she said. A monument lets people admire the past without doing anything in the present. I won't. Good. Come back when the roof stops leaking. Atlas greeted Grant in the parking lot with a low whine and one firm push of his nose against Grant's wrist. Grant held the notarized paper above the dog's head. We still own it. Atlas sneezed. By the time they returned to the station, the afternoon had gone bright and heavy. Atlas jumped from the truck, then stopped near the old freight room. A compact sedan sat beneath a cottonwood tree, its hood raised. A woman in work pants was asleep behind the wheel. Atlas approached within 10 feet and sat. He did not bark or lower his head. Grant knocked lightly on the open hood instead of the window. The woman woke, looked around, and opened the door. "Sorry," she said. "I'll move. Car won't start? Starter's gone. Tow truck took the last of my cash." She was in her 30s with tired eyes and a National Guard decal fading on the rear window. "Samantha Reed," she said. "Grant Holloway, this is Atlas." Samantha looked toward the station. "You own this place?" "As of this morning, twice." She laughed once, then covered it with a breath. Grant saw embarrassment arrive behind her eyes before she could hide it. He did not ask how long she had been sleeping in the car. "Have you eaten?" She looked at the ground. "Not today. There's soup across the street. The station has a clean bench and a door that locks." One night, no promises required. Samantha studied him, searching for the price hidden inside the offer. Atlas lay down between them, facing neither person. At last, she nodded. One night, Grant said. It was the first decision made inside the station that had nothing to do with repairing the building and everything to do with understanding why it had survived. Samantha woke before sunrise and folded Evelyn's blanket into a square precise enough to suggest old habits. Grant found her near the ticket window with the county inspection list spread across the counter. Atlas lay beneath the stopped clock, watching both of them. "I looked at the electrical panel," Samantha said. "I didn't touch anything." Grant poured coffee from the thermos Evelyn had left outside. "What did you see?" "Old equipment, not ruined equipment." She pointed to 3 items on the list. "The service needs replacing. Several runs need new insulation." But whoever wrote this report made it sound like every wire in the building had failed. Grant handed her a cup. "You know electrical work? National Guard maintenance unit, 10 years. After that, industrial controls." She looked at the coffee instead of him. "The plant closed in January. I had another position lined up in Columbus, but the start date moved twice." Grant did not ask what happened after that. Samantha had offered the part that mattered. She opened the panel cover and showed him a faded inspection stamp pressed into the metal. Dean Electric, Erie Skanky, 1988. Grant remembered the ledger. Walter Dean, 23. Recently separated from service, breakfast, and electrical apprenticeship. He pulled the book from the trunk and found the entry. Nora had added one note beneath it. Returned in 1988. Rewired lunch counter, refused payment. Evelyn found Walter's address through an old business listing. He lived 50 miles east in a white bungalow behind a closed-service garage. Grant drove there with Atlas in the back seat, and Samantha's written questions folded in his pocket. Walter Dean opened the door before Grant reached the porch. He was 82, broad through the shoulders despite the bend in his back, with hands marked by a lifetime of copper, steel, and tools. His eyes went first to Atlas. "Working dog, retired, aren't we all?" Walter let them inside. The kitchen smelled of coffee and cedar shavings. Grant placed a photocopy of the ledger entry on the table. Walter read it without sitting. His mouth moved once, around Nora's name. Then he crossed to a coat hanging beside the back door and reached into the inside pocket. He returned with a brass railway token worn smooth around the edge. "She gave me this in 1987, he said. On the back, scratched by hand, were the words, "Your next stop is not your final stop." Walter turned the token between 2 fingers. I had been out 6 weeks, thought the uniform had taught me who I was. Then the uniform was gone, and every job application seemed to ask for a person I had never learned to be. He sat across from Grant. "I came through Hawthorne with $30, a duffel bag, and no plan worth saying aloud. Nora put eggs in front of me before I finished asking for coffee. She let me sleep upstairs. The next morning, she called an electrician she knew and told him I could work." "Could you?" Grant asked. "Not yet." She said it like a fact anyway. Walter smiled, but his eyes stayed on the token. "That man taught me the trade. I opened Dean Electric 9 years later, hired veterans when I could. Nora never asked me to repay her. She only said I should notice the next person standing where I had stood." Grant showed him photographs of the station, the panel stamp, and the county list. Walter put on reading glasses and studied every page. "This inspection is lazy," he said. "Not entirely wrong. Lazy can be worse because it hides the parts that matter." He marked the service panel, emergency lighting, and 2 wire runs as priorities. "Your friend Samantha was right. Most of the copper is still good. She's not my employee." "Not what I said." Walter looked toward Atlas, who had moved beside the hanging coat. The dog lifted his nose toward the pocket where the token had been. Walter noticed. He finds what people keep close, usually before they're ready to show it. Walter slid the token across the table. Grant pushed it back. That belongs to you. It belonged to the man who needed it. I'm not that man anymore. Grant closed his hand around the brass. It held the warmth of Walter's palm. Walter agreed to visit the station Saturday and inspect the system properly. Before Grant left, Walter asked how the repairs would be funded. Grant told him about the silver coins. That afternoon, a coin dealer examined the jars and estimated their value near $50,000 if sold carefully. Grant chose enough coins to cover materials and left the rest untouched. He returned to Hawthorne Falls near dusk. A fresh orange notice had been fastened to the station door. The inspection date had been moved forward 7 days. Samantha stood beneath it with her arms folded. Atlas sat beside Grant, staring at the paper. Grant touched the brass token in his pocket. Their next stop had arrived sooner than expected. Walter arrived at the station Saturday morning in a pressed work shirt with a canvas tool bag older than Grant. Samantha met him at the electrical panel. Within an hour, they had separated the real hazards from the language written to make the building sound beyond repair. The service panel needed replacement. 2 wire runs had brittle insulation. Emergency lighting had to be added, the rest could stay. Walter signed his findings and attached photographs. Then, while Grant organized the paperwork, Walter opened Nora's ledger to the page marked 1989. His finger stopped midway down, Vol, he said. Grant looked over. The entry read, Helen Mercer, 25, widowed, nursing position delayed, no room and no fare, 3 weeks upstairs, hospital employment confirmed. Married Richard Vale Sr. in 1992. Walter tapped the maiden name. That was the mayor's mother. Grant read the line again. Nora had written no praise beside it, only the help provided and what came next. It was exactly the kind of record that carried more weight because it did not try to. The town council met Tuesday evening in a chamber above the municipal offices. Nearly 80 people filled the folding chairs. Evelyn sat beside Margaret. Samantha carried the inspection photographs in a plain binder. Walter wore the same pressed shirt. Atlas lay beneath Grant's chair, his front paws aligned, watching the room without reacting to every movement. Mayor Richard Vale sat behind the council table with a copy of the condemnation notice in front of him. He opened the discussion by calling the station a financial and safety risk. His voice remained measured, but Grant noticed the way Vale kept one hand over the orange notice, as though holding it in place. When Grant's name was called, he walked to the lectern with the ledger under one arm. Atlas followed without command and settled beside his left boot. Grant began with the building, not Nora. He presented the notarized transfer from Margaret, the independent electrical report, the coin appraisal, and a repair schedule divided into weekly goals. He agreed to replace the service panel, restore water, reinforce the rear stair, install emergency lights, and open the freight room floor for inspection. I am not asking the town to ignore code, he said. I am asking the town to use code for safety, not as a shortcut to demolition. Vale leaned toward his microphone. A repair plan does not create a public purpose. Grant looked at the ledger. No, sir. The people who came through that station created one. He explained who Nora Bell had been and what she had recorded. 186 adults, veterans between jobs, factory workers after closures, travelers discharged from hospitals with nowhere nearby to stay, people who needed a meal, a telephone, a dry room, or a name to call the next morning. Grant did not describe them as helpless. Nora had not. She had written what each person could do once given enough room to think. Evelyn stood when Grant read Thomas Ross's entry. Walter stood when his own name was read. A retired hotel manager in the back raised her hand and said Nora had sent 3 reliable employees to her family's business over the years. Another man said his father kept a toolbox Nora helped him buy. The room changed slowly, not through noise, but through recognition. Grant turned to the page from 1989. Atlas shifted closer until his shoulder touched Grant's leg. Grant rested 2 fingers against the edge of the lectern and read Helen Mercer's entry exactly as Nora had written it. Vale's hand lifted from the orange notice. For the first time that evening, his expression lost its practiced stillness. Grant closed the ledger halfway. Your mother arrived at Hawthorne Junction with a nursing job waiting and no way to survive the weeks before it began. Nora gave her a room, kept her suitcase behind the counter, and made sure she reached the hospital each morning. Your mother stayed in Hawthorne Falls. She built a career here. She met your father here. Vale said nothing. Grant did not press harder. I am not asking anyone to preserve a building because it is old. I am asking this council to understand what it held before deciding it has no value. Silence rested over the room. Then Councilwoman Denise Parker moved to suspend the condemnation order pending an independent structural review. The motion received a second. 3 hands rose in favor. Vale did not raise his. He did not oppose it either. The motion passed. Grant gathered the ledger and stepped away from the microphone. Atlas rose with him. Outside, the evening air was warm and smelled of cut grass. Grant had reached the bottom step when the side door opened behind him. Vale came out alone. He stood beneath the yellow courthouse light, holding the orange notice in one hand. "Mr. Holloway," he said. His voice no longer sounded like it belonged to the council chamber. "I need to ask you about my mother." Grant stopped. Atlas sat between them, calm and watchful. "All right," Grant said. "I'll tell you everything Nora wrote." Vale remained beneath the courthouse light while the last people crossed the parking lot. He folded the orange notice once, then again until it became a narrow strip in his hand. Grant waited on the bottom step. Atlas sat between them, his body loose but attentive. "My mother never spoke about the station," Vale said. "She told me she came to Hawthorne Falls for a nursing job. That was all." Grant opened Nora's ledger to Helen Mercer's entry and held it where Vale could read. Nora's handwriting was plain, almost spare. 3 weeks upstairs. Morning rides to the hospital. Suitcase stored behind the counter. First paycheck received. Vale traced no words with his finger. He only looked. "She kept that first hospital badge in her dresser," he said after a while. "I found it when we cleared the house. I thought it was pride. It probably was." Vale closed his eyes for a moment, then handed the ledger back. "There's something you should know about me before you decide what kind of man I am." Grant did not answer. Vale looked toward the empty street. His oldest son, Daniel, had returned from military service 9 years earlier. He had been trained, disciplined, and respected inside a system that told him where to stand and what came next. Back home, every decision seemed to require a version of himself he did not yet know how to become. Vale tried to help by arranging work, making schedules, and calling people without asking Daniel what he wanted. "I treated his uncertainty like disobedience," Vale said. "He left town after an argument. We spoke twice in 3 years. Daniel later died in a highway accident during heavy rain." Vale learned through a state trooper, not from anyone who knew his son well. Since then, he had distrusted every program built around second chances. He believed such places offered people temporary comfort while delaying the moment they had to face reality. "Then you walked into the auction," he said. "A veteran with almost no money buying a station that should have been condemned years ago. You looked like another man preparing to fail where everyone could see it." Grant felt the sentence strike somewhere familiar. He also heard what Vale had not said. "You looked like my son. So you tried to stop me before I could prove you wrong," Grant said. Vale nodded. "Or before you proved me right." The answer carried no excuse inside it. That mattered. Grant looked down at Atlas. The dog's eyes stayed on Vale, steady and unreadable. "An apology doesn't remove the notice," Grant said. "It doesn't return the week you took from the repair schedule. It doesn't make the old inspection accurate. No. Then what happens next matters more than what you say tonight." Vale unfolded the orange paper. He tore nothing. He smoothed it against his palm. "Tomorrow, I will request an independent structural inspection. The council will receive the same report you receive. No private additions, no altered deadlines, no language designed to frighten a buyer away. And if the report finds real hazards, you repair them or close the affected sections until you can." Grant nodded. "That's fair," Vale continued. The county had unused lumber from a canceled maintenance project and emergency lights purchased for a building later sold. He could make the materials available through the public surplus process. He would not choose Grant's contractors, control the station, or ask for a position in whatever organization followed. "You should put that in writing," Grant said. "I will. And the inspection date goes back to the original schedule." "Yes." Vale's shoulders lowered slightly, though relief would have been too generous a word. He stepped toward Atlas and stopped when the dog's ears shifted. "May I?" he asked. Grant appreciated that he asked. "Not yet." Vale lowered his hand. Understood. The next morning, Dennis Cole returned with an independent engineer named Laura Bennett. They spent 4 hours in the station, opening wall panels, testing floor sections, and photographing the roof framing. Grant showed them every weak point he knew about. Samantha stood beside the electrical panel and answered questions without defending her earlier conclusions. Walter arrived before noon and reviewed the service plan. Nobody hid anything. The final report identified 6 required repairs, all manageable within 6 weeks. 2 items from the old condemnation file had no supporting evidence and were removed. Vale arrived near the end carrying copies of the written agreement and a county surplus inventory. He did not enter until Grant waved him inside. For 3 Saturdays, Vale helped move lumber, clear the freight room, and sort plumbing fixtures. He offered advice only when asked. Atlas watched him from beside the lunch counter. On the 4th Saturday, Vale carried a box of emergency lights through the waiting room, set it down, and sat on the floor to catch his breath. Atlas crossed the tile, stopped beside him, and pressed his nose once against Vale's sleeve. Vale did not reach for him. He simply let his hand rest open on the floor. After a moment, Atlas placed his chin across it. Grant saw Vale look away toward the stopped station clock until his face settled. Trust had not erased what happened. It had started counting from a more honest place. 6 weeks after the independent inspection, Hawthorne Junction Station no longer looked abandoned from the road. It still looked old. Grant wanted that. The brick kept its weathered red, the platform columns showed their age, and one section of waiting room tile remained chipped where thousands of shoes had crossed it. Nothing had been polished into pretending the past had been easy. The roof held. The water ran clear. Emergency lights glowed above every exit. Samantha and Walter replaced the service panel and labeled each circuit in careful block letters. When the station clock began moving again, its first sound was a faint mechanical click. Grant stood beneath it with Atlas and watched the minute hand leave 3:17. It moved slowly, then kept going. Margaret filed the nonprofit papers under the name Nora's Platform. She said Hawthorne Renewal Center sounded like a place where forms went to die. Nora's Platform said what the building offered, a place between where someone had been and where they might go next. The board included Margaret, Evelyn, Walter, a retired accountant, and Grant. Vale asked for no seat. He completed the county surplus transfer and returned the paperwork without making a speech. 8 beds lined the far wall, divided by wooden screens Samantha built from salvaged oak. The baggage room became a workshop with benches, hand tools, safety glasses, and locked cabinets. The ticket office held 2 computers for resumes, job searches, and benefit applications. Upstairs, one room became a private office. Another became Grant's apartment. A narrow bed, a small table, and one window overlooking Platform 3. The lunch counter stayed where Nora had left it. Walter removed the damaged laminate and found solid oak beneath. He sanded it by hand for 3 days. When Grant thanked him, Walter ran his palm across the wood. "It was already good," he said. "We just stopped covering it." Evelyn organized the first meal. She made beef stew, bread, and enough coffee for twice the expected crowd. She wrote the station's first rule on a chalkboard: eat first, talk when you ready. Samantha added the second: ask before helping. Grant wrote the third: no one owes their pain as proof. Practical rules followed. Respect shared space. Do not take another person's property. Participate in a next step plan within 72 hours. The rules protected dignity without turning kindness into disorder. A safe place needs boundaries, Grant told the board. Otherwise, the calmest person gets pushed aside by the loudest. Samantha became the paid maintenance coordinator after accepting a position at a local controls company. Walter taught electrical safety twice a month. Vale ran a Saturday plumbing workshop and signed the same volunteer sheet as everyone else. Evelyn controlled the kitchen with a red towel over her shoulder, and one look that ended arguments before they began. Margaret cataloged Nora's photographs and ledger pages but refused to place the original book in an open display. "Those names are people, not decoration," she said. The ledger rested behind glass. Beside it sat a new book. It recorded no debts and no private histories, only arrival dates, chosen goals, and the day each person left with somewhere stable to go. Atlas became the station's quiet center. He rested near the entrance, visible without blocking the door. He never approached newcomers unless invited. Some people sat beside him without speaking. Others watched him for days before offering a hand. Grant noticed Atlas understood what many people missed. Respect could begin with distance. On opening night, 23 townspeople came. Grant kept his remarks short. He thanked Nora, the people who had trusted her, and those who repaired what neglect nearly erased. He did not call the station a miracle. Miracles required no invoices, inspections, aching shoulders, or second shifts. This place had been rebuilt by choices. After everyone left, Grant walked Platform 3 with Atlas. Warm rain darkened the brick. Through the windows, the waiting room glowed, and the restored clock showed the correct time. Grant touched the brass token in his pocket. Eli's workshop had never opened, something larger had. Atlas leaned against his leg. For the first time in years, Grant did not feel he was carrying a promise alone. "We're ready," he said. Atlas looked toward the road, as if someone was already coming. 6 months after the auction, Nora's platform had learned the sounds of evening. The coffee urn clicked off at 9. The workshop lights went dark one row at a time. Grant walked Platform 3 before locking the outer doors, and Atlas always went with him. The German shepherd's pace had slowed since spring, but he still inspected every bench and doorway, as if the station belonged to both of them. That night, warm September air carried the smell of cut grass and diesel. Grant had one hand around Walter's brass token when Atlas stopped near the end of the platform. His ears lifted. A sedan turned into the lot and idled beneath the cottonwood. A man stepped out with a canvas duffel and a work coat folded over one arm. He looked close to 40, broad-shouldered but tired, after holding himself together too long. The driver said something Grant could not hear. The sedan pulled away. He remained beside the curb, watching the station windows. Atlas walked down the ramp, stopped several feet from him, and sat. No bark, no demand, just presence. The man lowered his eyes to the dog. "You work here?" Atlas turned toward the entrance and looked back. The man followed. Grant met them inside. Evelyn had left beef soup on low heat. Samantha had stacked clean towels near the beds. The chalkboard carried Nora's first rule. "Eat first, talk when you're ready." "Evening," Grant said. The man tightened his grip on the duffel. "Someone at the truck stop said this place might be open." "It is. I can pay later." "We'll talk about later." Grant set a bowl of soup on the oak counter, added bread, then placed a key beside the spoon. "Bed 6. Locker 6. No forms tonight," without asking him to explain. Atlas settled near the counter, close enough to be seen, far enough to leave room. The first bites disappeared quickly. Then the man slowed. Grant turned away and wiped an already clean section of counter. Respect sometimes meant refusing to make hunger into a spectacle. After half the bowl, the man said, "My truck broke down outside Mansfield. I missed orientation for a maintenance job. They gave the position away." Grant nodded. "That's a hard day. I've had harder." "I believe you." The man looked toward the glass case holding Nora's ledger. "Do you write everybody down?" "Only what they choose to build next. Not what brought them through the door." The man considered that. "My name is Eli." Grant's hand stopped. The clock kept moving. Rain tapped against the high windows. Still, the name reached 12 years backward to paper coffee cups on Platform 3, an unfinished promise, and a friend who believed people could stand again if given enough time and decent tools. Atlas rose and pressed his shoulder against Grant's leg. Grant let one breath leave before trusting his voice. "That's a good name," he said. Eli studied him. "You all right?" "Yes. Just remembered someone." Eli finished the soup. Grant showed him the bed, shower, locker, and emergency exit. He explained that breakfast started at 6, and nobody would decide his next step without him. "Tomorrow, we'll call the garage, see whether the job can be recovered, and look at other options." "You do that for everyone?" "We help people make the calls. They do the living." Eli placed the duffel beside bed 6. "Fair enough." Before turning out the lights, Grant opened the new ledger. He wrote the date and one line under goals. "Repair truck. Fine steady work. Choose the rest himself." He left the departure column blank. Outside, the platform lamp shone across wet brick. Nora's ledger rested close behind glass. The restored clock showed the correct time. Atlas lay beside the front door, facing the road. Grant switched off the workshop lights, but left the waiting room lamp burning. The station had not been saved because anyone made it grand. It survived because people kept choosing not to let another person disappear inside a difficult night. Grant touched the brass token in his pocket. Your next stop is not your final stop. Then he closed the door gently and stayed on the inside. If Grant and Atlas's journey stayed with you, like the video and subscribe for more stories like this. Which moment meant the most to you, and where are you watching from?